What if death isn't the end at all? What if just beyond that final breath, there's a message waiting for us? A message Carl Jung tried to bring back, not from imagination, but from something much deeper. In 1944, Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in psychology, suffered a massive heart attack. While his body lay unconscious in a hospital bed, his consciousness went somewhere else. He described floating above Earth, detached from his physical body, completely at peace. But that was only the beginning. He found himself approaching a massive radiant temple in space, a place that seemed to hold total knowledge, eternal truth, or maybe even the soul's final destination. But just as he was about to enter, something stopped him, and that moment changed everything. Now you might be wondering, was it just a dream, a hallucination? That's the logical answer, right? But Jung didn't see it that way. As a man of both science and spirit, he believed what he saw wasn't random. It was symbolic, and it had a purpose. This video dives deep into that mystical vision, and why Jung believed what he experienced during that near-death moment revealed profound truths about the soul, the afterlife, and the hidden journey we're all on. Because maybe the real story of death is about coming home to yourself. So if you've ever wondered what lies beyond, or felt like there's more to your soul than meets the eye, this story might change the way you see life and death. Let's rewind to the year 1944. The world was in chaos. World War II was raging, and the collective human psyche was being tested like never before. But during that same year, something far more personal and far more mysterious happened to Carl Jung. Something that would alter the way he saw life, death, and the soul itself. Carl Jung was 69 years old when he suffered a massive heart attack. It wasn't just a mild scare, it was a severe, life-threatening event that pushed him into a state of deep unconsciousness. Medically speaking, his body was alive, but Jung, he was somewhere else. Now here's where it gets fascinating. Jung later recounted that he experienced something that modern medicine might call a near-death experience. But the way he described it, it didn't sound like a hallucination. It didn't feel like a dream. It was real, clear, vivid. He said he felt himself leaving his body literally, floating upward, gently detaching from the weight of flesh, pain, and fear. As he rose higher, he looked back and saw Earth itself small and distant, like a beautiful blue marble hanging in the darkness of space. Just imagine that for a moment. Looking down at the world not from an airplane window, but from the edge of the cosmos. He said he felt a deep calm, an incredible sense of peace and freedom. There was no anxiety, no attachment, just a quiet, expansive awareness. And here's where it becomes even more profound. Jung realized that in this state, he was free of what he called the persona, the false self we wear like a mask in our daily lives. He was free of the ego, free of all the roles, doctor, father, thinker, teacher. In that moment, he wasn't Carl Jung the man. He was simply being. This wasn't just some pretty metaphor to Jung. He believed he had actually encountered what he called the self, the true center of the psyche, the soul stripped of its earthly filters. That's why this wasn't terrifying. It was liberating. He described it as coming home. But what exactly did he see? Where was he going? What did it all mean? As he floated through the cosmic void, Jung approached something remarkable, a massive glowing stone temple suspended in space. Not made of earthly matter, but of something eternal, something beyond time. He didn't just see it, he felt it. A place of absolute stillness, profound silence, and sacred wisdom. He sensed that this temple was the center of all being, a symbolic house of truth. A space where everything he had ever sought to understand about the human mind, the soul, and the nature of reality, was somehow stored waiting to be known. But just as he drew closer, something stopped him. A presence or a force told him, "You're not ready. Not yet." And in that instant, he began to fall. Back to earth. Back into his body. Back into pain, identity, and limitation. It was only later when he woke from the coma that he began to grasp what had happened. This wasn't a random vision. This wasn't a trick of the brain. Jung believed it was a symbolic message from the depths of the unconscious, or maybe even the soul itself. Now, you might be wondering, how could a man of science, a psychiatrist, believe in something so mystical? But that's what made Jung so unique. He didn't see science and spirit as opposites. He saw them as two sides of the same coin. He believed that the psyche was a bridge connecting the material world and the eternal one. And his experience during that near-death moment, it was the bridge in action. He called the images he saw archetypes, universal symbols stored in the collective unconscious. The temple was not just a place. It was the place, the sacred core we all carry within. He couldn't enter it, because his inner work on earth wasn't finished. His soul still had more to integrate, more to learn. Think about that. Even after a lifetime of psychological breakthroughs, pioneering theories, and profound inner work, Jung's soul was still evolving. That tells us something huge. We're all students of the soul. And the journey doesn't end at death. It may only deepen. And maybe, just maybe, death is not a dark unknown, but a return. A return to the truth we've forgotten. A return to the self that's been whispering to us all along under the noise of daily life. So ask yourself, if you were to leave your body right now, what would you see? Would you feel peace or panic? Would your soul recognize itself, or would it still be searching? Jung's message wasn't to fear death. It was to prepare for it, not with rituals or religion, but through self-awareness, through individuation, through the deep work of integrating your shadow, your wounds, and your truth. So that when your time comes, you're not running from the light, you're walking toward it. What Jung saw next wasn't just breathtaking, it was symbolic. And it would stay with him for the rest of his life. As his soul drifted farther from earth and deeper into what felt like the threshold of the afterlife, he saw something emerge from the vast silence of space, a temple. But this wasn't any ordinary structure. It wasn't made of bricks or marble, nor was it tethered to any specific religion or culture. This temple was immense, round, ancient, and glowing with an inner light. It floated in the middle of the cosmos, suspended in the void, untouched by time. Jung instantly recognized that this temple wasn't just a building. It was a symbol, one that held profound meaning, not just for him, but for all of us. It was what he would later call the self. Now, in Jungian psychology, the self isn't the same as the ego. The ego is the mask we wear, the part of us that navigates daily life, seeks approval, fears judgment, and plays roles. The self, on the other hand, is something far deeper. It's the true center of our being, the part of us that remains whole, even when life feels fragmented. It's what you return to when all the noise is stripped away, when you are no longer someone's child, partner, boss, or patient, when you're just you. That temple, Jung believed, represented this deep inner truth. It was the place where all parts of the psyche, our light and our shadow, our conscious and unconscious, come together in wholeness. It was the final destination of what he called individuation, and the lifelong process of becoming who we truly are. But here's the part that might surprise you. As Jung moved closer to the temple, just as he was about to enter, he was stopped. Not physically, there were no guards or gates. But spiritually, he knew he wasn't allowed to go in. Something, perhaps his own soul, gently but firmly held him back. Why? Because his work on earth wasn't done. And this moment carries incredible meaning not just for Jung, but for anyone who's ever asked, am I truly living in alignment with who I really am? The fact that Jung couldn't enter the temple revealed something humbling. Even a man who had spent his entire life studying the psyche, mapping the unconscious, and walking the path of inner transformation had more work to do. Think about that. This wasn't punishment. It wasn't rejection. It was simply the truth. Jung's soul had not yet fully integrated. He had not yet completed the journey to his self. And maybe that's the message for all of us. How often do we go through life thinking we're done? That we've read enough, healed enough, evolved enough? But what if the soul operates on a deeper timeline, one not measured in years or accomplishments, but in integration? What if your own temple is still waiting for you to face the parts of yourself you've denied, to reconcile the versions of you that are still at war, to embrace both your light and your shadow, not as enemies, but as essential parts of the whole? That's what individuation is about. Not becoming perfect, but becoming whole. And Jung's vision reminds us that this work doesn't end when our careers peak, when our kids grow up, or even when our bodies begin to fade. The soul continues to evolve. The journey inward never really stops. Now let's go back to that image, this ancient glowing temple floating in space. Why a temple? Why that symbol? In countless cultures, temples have always represented sacred space, a place where the divine meets the human, where truth is revealed, where silence speaks. But Jung's temple wasn't built by any civilization. It wasn't rooted in any single tradition. That's the point. It was universal. It symbolized a deeper truth that within each of us lies a sacred center, a space untouched by trauma, by fear, by ego. A space that knows who we are, even when we forget. A space that calls us home. And the fact that Jung couldn't yet enter, that's not failure, it's permission. Permission to keep going, to keep healing, to keep seeking. Because maybe the real tragedy isn't death itself, but dying before we've ever truly met ourselves. So let me ask you, if you saw your temple today, would you be ready to walk in? Would you recognize it? Would you feel at peace? Or would you feel that tug that something inside you still wants to be seen? Healed, understood. Carl Jung's vision was never meant to scare us. It was meant to wake us up, to remind us that the temple isn't out there in the stars, it's within. It's been with us all along, and every act of honesty, every moment of shadow work, every step we take toward authenticity is a step toward its door. So here's the part that truly separates Jung's vision from typical stories about death. He didn't come back talking about heaven or hell. There were no angels, no flames, no final judgments. Instead, what Jung experienced and later described was something far more symbolic, far more personal, and far more psychological. According to Jung, after death, we don't just vanish into darkness. We don't float in a meaningless void. Instead, the soul enters a process. And this process isn't random, it's rich with symbols, images, and meaning. Let me explain. Jung believed that the human mind, especially the unconscious, is filled with what he called archetypes. These are universal symbols that live deep within every one of us. You've seen them before, even if you didn't realize it. The wise old man, the nurturing mother, the hero's journey, the shadowy stranger. These archetypes show up in myths, dreams, movies, and religions across every culture and time. To Jung, these aren't just literary devices. They are part of the collective, unconscious, a kind of psychic blueprint shared by all of humanity. So when Jung described what he saw during his near-death experience, the ancient temple, the radiant light, the sense of a guiding presence, he wasn't describing hallucinations. He wasn't just dreaming. He was experiencing archetypes. And he believed these archetypes guide the soul through death, just as they shape us in life. Think about that for a second. If our soul carries these deep, symbolic images, and if those images emerge again at the moment of death, then death isn't just a physical event. It's a psychological and spiritual unfolding. It's not an end, it's a transition, a guided, meaningful transformation of consciousness. And Jung's message was crystal clear. After death, the soul doesn't disappear. It continues evolving through symbolic truths that life has already been preparing it for. Let that sink in. It means that the work we do in life, facing our fears, integrating our shadow, embracing our true nature, it all matters. Not just for now, but for what comes after. The symbols that appear at the moment of death, they're not new. They've been with you all along, in your dreams, in your gut instincts, in the questions that won't leave you alone. So the more you understand yourself now, the more you explore your inner world, the more prepared your soul is when this final transition comes. That's powerful. And it challenges so much of what we've been taught to fear about death. In mainstream culture, death is often seen as the great eraser, a terrifying void, a tragic ending. But for Jung, death was a mirror, a moment when the unconscious finally reveals itself fully. A moment when everything you've hidden, denied, or misunderstood comes back in symbolic form. Not to punish you, but to guide you home. That's why he emphasized the role of symbols, because these images are the language of the soul. And we must learn to read that language while we're still alive. Now here's the part that gives me chills. Jung believed that the afterlife doesn't begin after we die. It begins now in how we relate to our inner world, our dreams, our wounds, and our truth. Because when the time comes, the transition won't feel foreign. It will feel like remembering. So ask yourself, are you living in a way that prepares your soul? Are you listening to the symbols in your dreams? Are you ignoring the parts of yourself that are calling out for integration? Maybe that temple Jung saw wasn't just his. Maybe we all have a version of that temple. And maybe the people who fear death the most are the ones who haven't yet made peace with their own inner world. This is why Jung's vision matters not just to psychologists or spiritual seekers, but to everyone. Because his message is universal, the soul is not finished at death. It's just moving deeper into the symbolic truths that life has been whispering all along. If that's true, then every day is a preparation. Every dream is a doorway. Every moment of self-reflection is a step forward. And that changes everything. You see, Jung wasn't trying to create a religion. He wasn't preaching a doctrine. He was offering a map. A psychological map to help us make sense of what happens when we leave this body. He was saying, look within. The answers aren't out there in the stars. They've been inside you this whole time. And perhaps the greatest illusion is thinking death is something to run from. So what can you take from this? Start paying attention to your dreams. Notice the symbols that keep returning, the places, the faces, the feelings. They're not random. Explore your shadow, the parts of you that feel uncomfortable or unknown. There is wisdom there. And most of all, stay curious about your own evolution, not just intellectually, but emotionally and spiritually. Because in Jung's words, the soul continues its journey through the symbols it's carried all along. And when that moment comes, when your soul stands before its temple, you won't be afraid. You'll feel ready. Carl Jung didn't return from his near-death experience with a list of ultimate truths. He didn't claim to unlock the gates of heaven or decode the secrets of the afterlife. But what he did bring back was perhaps even more valuable, a spiritual map. A guide not drawn from dogma or superstition, but from deep psychological insight, lived experience, and the symbolic language of the soul. And through his story, he leaves us with something powerful to reflect on. Death isn't the end. It's a mirror. And in that mirror, we see the soul we've built through every choice, every shadow we've faced, and every truth we've dared to live. Jung's message wasn't just about dying well. It was about living with intention, living in a way that prepares us for that final transition, living in a way that when the time comes, we're not clinging to personas or running from regret, but moving toward wholeness, toward light, toward our inner temple. And that journey starts now. Because the truth is, our soul is always evolving. The work of individuation, of understanding ourselves beyond ego and image, is never too early to begin, and never too late to continue. So maybe the question isn't, what happens when we die? Maybe the real question is, are we living in a way that prepares our soul for what comes next? Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a mystical experience, something that made you question what lies beyond this life? Or maybe you've wrestled with big questions about death dreams or the unconscious. If so, I invite you to share it in the comments below. This space is for honest reflection, and your story might just help someone else on their path. And if this journey into Jung's vision sparked something inside you, if it opened your eyes to the deeper layers of the psyche and soul, then make sure to subscribe. We're just getting started. There are so many mysteries still to explore about the soul, the unconscious, and the symbolic wisdom that connects us all. So stay curious, and remember, the afterlife may not be some faraway place. It might already be whispering from within.